Hey guys, how are you all doing? This is the MMA breakdown with my predictions for UFC Fight Night 36, Machida versus Mousasi. Um, Typical Fight Night card. Uh, this is taking place in Brazil, which seems to be the theme for a lot of the Fight Night cards now. Airing on Fox Sports 1. The prelim card is a bunch of crap. No fights to really get excited about here. Main card, I have some decent fighters on there. The matchups really aren't any good though. A lot of big mismatches here that we'll get to, but it's weird. The only thing I'm really interested in here is the main event, Machida and Mousasi. But typical fight night card. This new era of the UFC's international expansion and just filling these fight cards with a bunch of low level talent, guys you don't really care about. But let's get into it. I'll give you my predictions. First up, on the UFC, we have 7 fights on the UFC Fight Pass prelim card. Now looking forward to it. First up at featherweight, Douglas Silva DeAndre taking on Zubair Tukhugov. Zubair Tukhugov sounds like he might be Russian. I'd be tempted to take him, but after UFC 169, I realized that not every Russian is a Khabib Nurmagomedov. Being in Brazil, I might have to side with the Brazilian here, Douglas Silva de Andrade, but couldn't tell you a thing about either of these guys. Next up at welterweight, Ildemar Alcantara taking on Albert Tumanov. This guy's another Russian. Let's pull up his record here. He's on a long win streak, 8-fight win streak. Looks like he's been around the Russian circuit. Hasn't beaten anyone I've ever heard of. And Ildemar Alcantara, I believe this is his 4th fight. This is his 3rd fight in the UFC. He had a pretty nifty knee bar submission over Wagner Prado last year, and had an extremely forgettable fight against Leandro Silva. I remember that fight being very boring, very uneventful. Basically, a pretty crappy sparring point fighting kind of fight. I'm sorry, this is his 4th fight, and then he lost his last fight to Igor Araujo, where he's basically beaten on the ground, and he was completely out hustled by Araujo in that fight. So Alcantara, I don't think fights with the most passion. I don't think he has shown much heart, a really willingness to get after it. So I'm going to take Tumenov here. Again, don't know a thing about this guy, but I haven't been too impressed with Alcantara aside from that knee bar submission one. But that was at light heavyweight, and this is at welterweight, and hasn't looked good there in his last 2 fights at all. So I'm going with Tumenov. Next up at featherweight, Felipe Arantes taking on Maximo Blanco. 2 guys who haven't had a ton of success in the UFC so far. Felipe Arantes lost his last fight against Kevin Souza, I believe. Yeah, where he was outstruck by a far more skilled striker, rangy striker. Arantes couldn't get in on the inside. Arantes also has a loss against Yuri Alcantara. That was his first fight in the UFC way back in 2011. Since then, he's had a decision win over Antonio Carvalho, a draw with Milton Vieira, and his one finish win over Godofredo Pepe Castro, which was his last fight. Really, the only fight where I thought he looked, looked like he had some promise. The Antonio Carvalho fight, he looked decent in that. I remember. I really don't have too much of a feel for Arantes' game still. A lot of his fights have been tedious decisions. Milton Vieira, Kevin Souza, but I do remember him being out grappled by Alcantara, and Kevin Souza really kind of dominated him on the feet. And Maximo Blanco won his last fight against Sam Sicilia. I'm sorry, he lost his last fight against Akira Corsani. That was the fight where he illegally kneed Corsani. Before that, won against Sam Sicilia. That fight was a brawl, but Blanco edged it out, being more technical. And before that, lost a decision against Marcus Brimage, where I thought he was really outstruck. So I'm going to take, I don't know, Arantes, I think, maybe Blanco. This is a bit of a toss-up for me. If Arantes can get Blanco down, he'll win, I think. Might even pull off some of that ground and pound we saw against Godofredo Pepe. Blanco on the feet, though, I think he'll be more active, more technical. I think he'll be able to land more on the feet. Toss-up for me. If I have to pick, I'm going to take Blanco by decision. Next up at bantamweight, Yuri Alcantara versus Wilson Reyes. Yuri Alcantara is a guy I've been actually really high on since coming to the UFC. The guy's really skilled and really proves it every time out. Had a win over Felipe Arantes in his first fight in the UFC, coming over from WEC, where he had a knockout of Ricardo Lamas. Then he had another decision win over Michihiro Omagawa, lost to Hakran Diaz, beat Pedro Nobre, but it was a no contest because you guys remember that whole debacle. Nobre, everyone said he pretended like he was hit in the back of the head. It was a no contest, but he looked great in that fight. Alcantara did. And then ran through Iliardi Santos. And then lost to Faber in his last fight, where he got Faber in a bad spot early on, took his back, but Faber was able to out wrestle him the rest of the fight. But Alcantara, one of these guys, really talented grappler, really showed great killer instinct right out of the gate in his fight against Iliardi Santos, which was last May, so not too long ago. Great leg kicks, great kind of nice blend of technique and lethal power. Super athletic guy. He'll get right to it, jump all over you. I already said a pretty talented grappler. Showed that in the Omagawa fight. Has had a problem against wrestlers. Hakran Diaz and Uriah Faber. Wilson Reyes is I'm not sure how good his wrestling is, he was able to really control Ivan Menjivar on the ground in his last fight. Um, I remember, I think he just basically rode out top control for that whole fight against Menjivar. Never really mounted any real offense, as I remember. Um, I'm not too familiar with Reyes. Never saw him fight before he fought Menjivar. He's on a 5-fight winning streak. I'm going to reckon that his wrestling is not good enough to hold Alcantara down. And Alcantara just seems like one of these really hungry guys and always going for the kill right at the start of every fight. So I got to go with Alcantara, and I'm gonna pick him to finish Reyes. Next up, at lightweight, Francisco Trinaldo versus Jesse Ronson. Trinaldo's he lost his last fight against Piotr Hallman. It's pretty bizarre. I thought he's such a huge guy. This guy fought at middleweight on Tough Brazil 1. Now he's at lightweight in the UFC, and he's had some decent performances, mostly against tough vets. Has finishes of Delson Eleno and Mike Rio, finish of CJ Keith. Lost a fight to Gleison Tebow, but that fight was pretty competitive. And then Piotr Hallman, he was beating him early on in that fight. And then Hallman just kind of pulled a Kimura out of nowhere in that fight. A pretty big, huge guy for lightweight. Very strong. Really imposes his strength on his opponents. He has a good arm triangle choke. He's gone for that a few times. Got Rio with it and almost got Tebow with it. And seems to have some decent striking as well. Showed some pretty good kickboxing in his last fight against Piotr Hallman before getting finished. And Jesse Ronson, on the other hand, I can't remember who this guy fought. I think it was, I want to say, Mikel Prazeres, I believe, in his last fight. He was out-grappled early on in that fight, got his back taken, but really kind of got stronger and turned it on towards the end. Remember, he had a really cool kind of a high crotch takedown where he had his back against the fence and just kind of lifted the guy up and flipped him over. But I don't think that's going to be enough against Trinaldo. I do think this could be a fun fight. Ronson seems like he doesn't fold easily, and Trinaldo's shown the pretty good striking with the strong submission game, but Ronson getting out-grappled by a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy in his last fight. I think Trinaldo can do the same, especially with his wrestling. So I'm going to pick Trinaldo here, maybe by finish. I'm going to say Trinaldo by decision. I could also, I could see a case actually now where Ronson kind of waits out the storm early on and turns it on Trinaldo late in the fight. I could see that happening, or I could see Trinaldo getting an early finish. Actually, Trinaldo, I don't think he can go hard for 3 rounds. The weight cut he makes. This just got more interesting. I'm still going to side with Trinaldo here, but I think you can make a strong case for Ronson, and this might be a bit of a toss-up. Next out of lightweight, Rodrigo Dam versus Ivan Jorge. Ivan Jorge, I believe he's dropping down from welterweight, and he fought Keith Winooski in his last fight, and they gave Jorge the decision, but I really felt Winooski won that fight. not much went on in that fight as I remember it. I think Jorge got a lot of waist control, back control from the feet, a lot of clinch work. Nothing too impressive, and like I said, I thought he lost that fight. Rodrigo Dam, on the other hand, up and down since coming to the UFC. He beat Anastavio Medeiros from Tough Brazil 1 in the Tough finale for that show. Finished him. And since then, he dropped a decision to Carvalho and won a decision against Mizuto Hirota in his last fight. But both those fights against Hirota and Carvalho, pretty uneventful. They look very similar. Dam basically trying to be a kickboxer, and he's not a very good one. Doesn't have great striking at distance. Throws some leg kicks. Doesn't have too good technique with his striking. So I'm gonna go with Dam. I just from what I remember of Ivan Jorge's last fight, doesn't really. I don't think he pushes the pace quite as much as Dam, but not that Dam really fights at that high of a pace. But I think he's coming forward. He's working a bit more. I'm gonna take Dam by decision. Next up, at lightweight, the last fight on the UFC Fight Pass prelim card. Cristiano Marcelo taking on Joe Proctor. I have Joe Proctor easy here. Marcelo is one of these Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belts, and I'm not trying to say anything disrespectful by saying this, but a lot of the Jiu-Jitsu black belts, guys who are highly touted in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu coming into the MMA, really haven't done too well in the UFC. I mean, there are a few exceptions to that, but a lot of these guys seem to, only have that Jiu-Jitsu pedigree and not much else, not a full MMA game. And Marcelo got knocked out by Justin Lawrence in the Tough House. In the finale, he got finished by Sam Sicilia. And Sam Sicilia, just a wild brawler with absolutely zero technique with his striking, especially at that point, which was 2 years ago, and he finished Marcelo. He was in another brawl with Reza Madadi, which he got the decision in. That was another back and forth brawl, and then lost the decision to Kazuki Tokudome in a fight I'm having trouble remembering. I don't think I remember anything about that fight. But just doesn't seem like he can ever really get in a position to implement his jiu-jitsu skills, and on the feet I just don't think he has really much of anything to offer anyone. And Joe Proctor, he was on that same season of Tough as Cristiano Marcelo. Got a nice submission win over Chris Tickle in that fight. I believe it was a standing rear naked choke. And he didn't even take the back. He just kind of locked in the rear naked choke standing and finished it there, if I remember correctly. But it's only had 2 fights in the UFC since being in the Tough House. Knocked out Jeremy Larson with a knee and strikes, and then lost to Ramsey Najim. Dropped a decision in a fight against Najim, but that fight was back and forth. Proctor even hurt him at one point, if I remember correctly. But Najim was able to get the better of the striking there and the grappling. But Proctor, I think he's one of these real crafty guys. He trains out of Lozon's gym. dangerous striking, as we've seen in the Jeremy Larson fight, and I really like his style. I think he's going to have an easy time with Marcelo. I think he's going to finish him early. I'll say TKO first or second round. Now on to the main card. Charles Oliveira taking on Andy Little Axe Ogle. Charles Oliveira is a guy who I thought was always extremely talented. Had a few setbacks at lightweight. Came down to featherweight. Had two nice submission wins over Eric Wisely and Jonathan Brookins. Really, showed great submission prowess in both those fights. Got a calf slicer and an anaconda choke in both of those fights. And since then, got knocked out by Cub Swanson, then dropped a decision against Edgar. Although that fight against Edgar, it wasn't completely one-sided. I mean, Edgar won, but Oliveira was tough. He hung in there, and Oliveira's, he had the jiu-jitsu, very dangerous on the ground. We've seen rear naked choke wins from him. We've seen him lock up triangles, anaconda choke, calf slicer, and on the feet, he's not bad. He doesn't fare too well against these guys, though he can really come forward, press the action, and who have big power. Andy Ogle, he does come forward a lot, but not too skilled. Incredible heart, though. Since coming in the UFC, he lost to Kira Corsani in a fight that was competitive, and he knocked Corsani down on the feet a few times in that fight. Won a decision over Josh Grisby, where he was stuck in a triangle choke at several points, but was able to pound on Grisby from on top, being in the triangle choke, and lost his last fight against Cole Miller and where the first two rounds he was dominated, putting a lot of submission holds, but the third round he really came back to pour it on Miller, ground and pounding him and being able to keep top control. But I like Oliveira easy in this fight. I think he's going to run through Ogle. Ogle's shown great heart. I think he has a really limited skill set and not too athletic either, but has a lot of heart, comes forward. I think he's going to make this a brawl from the beginning. He's going to try to headhunt, knock out Oliveira, but I think Oliveira is far too skilled on the feet and on the ground for Ogle. I'm going to take Oliveira by submission. I think he'll hurt Ogle on the feet and finish him off on the ground. Next up at welterweight, Viscardi Andrade taking on Nicholas Mousasi. Andrade, tough Brazil 2 veteran. I believe he lost to Padalino in the house, and then in his last fight made quick work of Bristol Marunde, knocking him out early in the fight. And from what I've seen from him on Tough, he looks like a real brawler. Throws a lot of kind of haymakers, tries to put a lot of power in his strikes, but the technique is not really there and doesn't really use much of, doesn't wrestle too much. Doesn't really implement the grappling into his game. Nicholas Mousasi finished what's his name? The Italian guy. Alessio Sakara in his last fight. Finished him with an armbar. I believe Mousasi got rocked by Sakara early on, but was able to hurt Sakara with his own strikes and then finished him off with that armbar. I'm going to pick Andrade. I think he has more power on the feet. I thought he improved. He showed improvement in his win over Marunde. He seemed not to get into a brawl too much, pick his shots a little more carefully. Musoke though, I don't know. He seems. I thought it was impressive the way he finished Sakara, a veteran, easy in the first round. Um, this is kind of a tough one. I'm I'm gonna take Andrade, but I think it's a bit of a toss up, and I wouldn't be too surprised if Musoke pulls this out. Musoke seems a bit craftier, I think, with his submissions and with his striking than Andrade. Andrade's more kind of sheer power and head hunting, but I'm gonna take Andrade, but not by much. Next up at welterweight, Eric Silva taking on Takanori Sato. Um, don't know anything about Sato. He was on a 2-fight win streak. 4-fight win streak with a draw in the middle. Hasn't fought anyone that I've heard of recently. And then Eric Silva, a super talented guy. I thought he looked great up until even in the John Fitch fight. I thought he looked really good and had his moments in there. I mean, had a fully locked on rear naked choke, but I just think that was more a Fitch. Being the tough veteran, tough fighter, really tough to finish. At least he used to be. Really proving that in that fight, and Eric Silva still had looked great at moments in that fight. But then just totally got derailed by Stun Gun Kim in his last fight. Really kind of shocking. I think he's going to be super hungry to get a win. And a very dangerous striker. A guy who really goes after it. He's shown decent takedown defense even against good wrestlers. And just a very... I think he's very talented on the feet. And also with his jiu-jitsu, that armbar he pulled off on Jason High, he's very, very slick. Wastes no time in getting a dominant position or firing off his lethal strikes. In his last fight, though, against Kim, I thought he was a bit too aggressive, too over-eager, and kind of left an opening. But I expect him to just run through Sato. I think Silva's super talented, and I think he's a legitimate prospect. I think he can be a top contender one day. He's 29, older than I thought, but I think he's going to be super hungry for a win here, and he's obviously shown that he has great finishing ability, very lethal striking, both with his hands and in his knees, and his lightning quick speed as well. So I'm taking Eric Silva here. Next up, middleweight in the co-main event, Ronaldo Jacare Souza taking on Francis Carmont. A total mismatch. Souza's been super impressive since coming in the UFC. Finished Chris Camozzi easily in the first round with an arm triangle, and then took a huge step up in competition to fight Yushin Okami and totally just put it on him in the first round. Just threw bombs and knocked out Yushin Okami. Very impressive. I think he's a legitimate contender. And Francis Carmont, a lot of people hate him, as do I, for his last couple of decision wins. I thought his last fight with Costas Philippou, he was able to get that takedown over and over again, which is, impressive. That alone is impressive, but then he wasn't able to do anything with it. He would he would throw a punch where he would scream at the same time. He did that maybe once every 20 seconds or so. Literally threw like one punch and then would just stop and do that again at at pretty spaced out intervals. The fight against Larkin before that, I thought he just got outstruck on the feet and was able to get that takedown a few times, and they gave him the decision. I thought he lost that one. The fight against Tom Lawler, I thought he lost. He got taken down a few times in that fight. But, this is a guy, when he came in, he was a lot more willing to engage, a lot more exciting than he is now. He had a tough fight with Chris Camozzi. I remember that being a kind of a back and forth fight, but Carmont really hurt Camozzi in that fight, beat him up, and was looking for the finish, and then had two rear naked choke wins over Magnus Edenblad and Carlos Vemola. So this was a guy who, he does have finishing ability, but is just, I think that's really gone from his game now, and he's just become a decision machine. He's a huge guy for middleweight, very athletic, very big, and that really works well with his lay and pray style. And everything tells you that Souza should just run through Carmont, knock him out easily, and I am going to pick Souza. Anytime Carmont fights now, I get this sinking feeling. I'm fearful that Carmont, might be a little too big for everyone in the division, and if he can get that takedown on Souza, which I think is a bit unlikely, if he gets that takedown, I could see him just laying there and laying and praying his way to a win. Really hoping Souza has another really incredible performance, though, so he can go on to fight for the title. So I am taking Souza. I'm taking him by knockout, early first round. But again, Carmont's size and just his willingness to lay and pray has me just slightly doubtful here. In the main event, Lyoto Machida versus Gegard Mousasi. Really liked Machida's last fight against Mark Munoz, getting the head kick knockout. Looked like he made a concerted effort to go for the finish early and to really put his opponent away. The fight before that against Phil Davis, he was really criticized, and he's another one of these guys who I think he's just far more talented and skilled in the striking realm than almost all of the opponents he's faced, but he loses fights, loses decisions because he's just it's become really ingrained in his fighting style. To counter strike, to wait for his opponent to come forward and react off of that. But if he fights like he did against Mark Munoz, I think he's dangerous against anyone. Gegard Mousasi, on the other hand, I didn't watch a lot of Strikeforce, so I'm not too familiar with his fights. I saw the fight against Keith Jardine. I saw when he lost to Muhammad Lawal, King Mo, and I saw his win over Mike Kyle, and then his last win in the UFC over Ilir Latifi. He also has a win over Ovince St. Preux. But in the Ilir Latifi fight, he was fighting a guy who was far less skilled than him, and Mousasi just fought very methodically, never really looked for the finish, just kind of jabbed his way to victory. And I thought that was disappointing, and I don't know if that's kind of telling us where he's at motivation-wise and mentally. Maybe it's just the late change of opponent, but I don't know, I didn't like that last performance against Latifi. Yeah, so I'm not too familiar with Mousasi. I saw him submit Mike Kyle. Seems like he's decent on the ground. Although he did show a weakness in his takedown defense against King Mo and against Keith Jardine, but I think he's a pretty I think he's a talented striker. Really beat up Jardine in their fight, even though he couldn't finish him. But Machida, if Machida sits back, if he sits back like he did against Phil Davis, like he did against Rampage Jackson, I could see Mousasi winning. I think he could get the decision by coming forward. If Musasi's not that aggressive, I could see Machida just knocking him out or just controlling the striking range and outpointing Mousasi. I think Machida would be able to take Mousasi down as well. It's not a big part of his game at all, the wrestling, but it used to be more, I think. But Machida can get the takedown when he goes for it. But I think I like Machida in this fight. I like his chances more. I think he's more dangerous of a striker than Mousasi. And again, Mousasi's this is his first fight at middleweight in the UFC. Who knows how that weight cut's gonna go, but I don't know if anything on Mousasi's resume tells me he can beat Machida. But and also I think it's kind of weird that Mousasi's dropping down to middleweight. Obviously there's there's bigger fights for him on the way to the title, but why would you leave such a thin division like light heavyweight? Light heavyweight's extremely thin. I think even with his win over Ilir Latifi, even if he hadn't fought in the UFC, he would already be on the short list of contenders at light heavyweight. But it's coming down to middleweight. I think I like Lyoto Machida's chances here. I think he realizes he needs to finish people, and he's had too many decisions kind of go against him. So I have to go with Machida. I don't know if he'll get the knockout. I'm gonna say Machida by decision. So those are my predictions for UFC Fight Night 36, Machida versus Mousasi. Thanks a lot for watching, guys. Please like the video, comment with your thoughts, and subscribe. Take care, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye.